So much feedback on our last episode. We love the feedback. Send your emails anytime, ohlpodcast@rogers.com. Tag Dan Mahar on X at his name, Dan Mahar. Tag me at Farwell _ OHL. Clearly, it is the playoffs, and you expect us to be in playoff form. And by us, I mean me. Yes, it was Gallianoff that got rocked by Kayshawn Aitchison. Cash. Sean Doherty came in to answer for that, but Gallianoff was the one who got caught with his head down in the trolley tracks, and Aitchison filled him in with what I still maintain was a very clean hit. But Mahar, where the hell were you on that one? You're like, oh yeah, Farwell, I didn't want to interrupt his good rant. Come on. I ranted earlier about the Ice Dogs as a team. I was raving like a lunatic about how good that hit was. And everybody has called me out on it, deservedly so. I take pride in maintaining accuracy. I let you down. That's on me. But Mahar, what kind of teammate are you? You used to be like, we used to be center and winger on the same line. And this time you're just like, whatever, you're going to fly in there offside, do some cherry picking. Come on now.
You know how it is. Sometimes you're tired and your line mate's going on rush. Like, he's got this. He's got this. Yeah,
He's got
and
the
for
wrong
every
guy.
well, yeah, but for every time I've said the North Bay Centennials, it probably evens out, if not then some. So yeah, it was a good rant. I didn't want to stifle it.
And I did try to bring back the Niagara Falls Thunder as well. Let's not forget. Or the Flyers. Who was I bringing back? The Thunder, the Flyers? Doesn't
The
matter.
Thunder, yeah.
Yeah, we were bringing back Niagara Falls, other teams. And anyway, thank you again. Appreciate it. Want to maintain accuracy and whatever shreds of credibility I have left after another season of this. And it was Gallianoff on the ice when Doherty came in to answer for that monster body check. Also, in the past week, Dan, a lot of love for our friends over on the OHL in 60 podcast, doing some great work over there. Keep it up, Colin, Reese, you're doing good work over there. But maybe the love for them, Dan, is because we started the second round a week ago on the OHL podcast, and we made 0 predictions, not a one. And again, I'm going to own that. I was so focused on us. We had just recorded after the second round ended, trying to get an episode done before we had a busy day ahead. This, that, the other thing. Predictions never even occurred to me. The guys on the OHL in 60 made theirs. Maybe we could make good for that right now. It'll be on the honor system.
Yeah.
But if you want to throw out your 4 predictions for round 2, I'm all ears. I'll do mine as well. And you'll know it's on the honor system because I'm not off to a good start. But anyway, who did you have this round
Is
that
it
we
same?
completely forgot to
So
talk about?
yeah, I went 7 for 8 in round one. Missed
Yeah.
missed on the Erie Otters. Round two, I'm currently looking like I'm going to be 2 for 4, which isn't great. I had London. We want to go number of games as well, Mike, or no?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, all right. So I had London in 5. I had Windsor in 7. I had Kingston in 6, and I had Oshawa in 7. So as things stand right now, you can tell it's the honor system because 2 of those 4 are not looking great.
Absolutely. Okay, so I went 6 for 8 in round 1, missing the Otters because I had Saginaw winning, and I also took Brampton in the quote unquote upset, and the Oshawa Generals still want to make me pay for that. So I was 6 for 8. But just to show this is the honor system, I'll start in the East where I had Kingston in 5. That's right, I had Kingston in 5, which is now a mathematical impossibility. Okay, I had Brantford in 7. I had London in 6, and I had Kitchener in 6, which is still a mathematical possibility if the Kitchener Rangers can win 4 straight over that high-flying Windsor team. I think it goes the distance, but everybody was saying it would go the distance, so I thought I'd be clever and say Kitchener in 6. But that's what I had. Also not exactly looking great for my second round, certainly with the way Barrie's playing. But anyway, those were my predictions, and now maybe we can be on par with our friends over at the OHL in 60.
Yeah, well, and yeah, clearly we're both honorable because we stuck with our original. And yeah, I'll tip my cap to the Barrie Colts. I wasn't sure based on round one what I saw from that man Kingston that they were going to pull it out, but they've turned a corner here. They're found another gear.
We'll get to more of our second round analysis in just a bit, but starting with some league news, Dan, and it lands as almost inconsequential league news, but I'm reading a little more into this perhaps, and maybe that's just me looking for a good conspiracy. But the Ontario Hockey League wanted to trumpet the fact earlier this week that it has modernized its standard player agreement. Not a whole lot really changes here. This sounds cosmetic to me. What it sounded like to me is that the league is making it clear that there is scholarship money available. It's very aware that the scholarship money may be used in the NCAA because that opportunity exists now. And oh, yeah, by the way, instead of $1,000 for your off-season training needs, you could get up to $2,000 for your off-season training needs. Unless I'm missing something, I didn't really read anything more, at least onto the surface of that news from the Ontario Hockey League. What about you?
Yeah, that's right, Mike. It was light on details for sure. I think what I took away from it was that we've known for a while that maybe some of the policies in there were a little bit antiquated, need to be bumped up, if you will, in order to compete with other leagues. So I think this is a little bit of maybe a modernization in that sense. You referenced the $1,000 to 2,000 for off-season training. So there's amounts like that that everyone felt for a while needed to be bumped up. Maybe some of the rules around when you can use a scholarship, those types of things. But I think the OHL, CHL are always playing with the balancing act, right, Mike, of the franchises to where that's a big deal. We've heard franchises complain in the past that having scholarship money or possible scholarship money hanging over their bottom line for years down the road is a real problem. So it's not as easy as just saying across the league, oh yeah, let's let them use their scholarships, until they're 25, or some are just blowing the doors off it. So they're trying to find that balance, and that's why you might not see drastic changes, but I think they're doing what they can to still be viable across the board, but say, okay, we got to bump some of this up a little bit, make it a little more appealing.
You talk about remaining competitive, and that's where I put on my tinfoil helmet here just a little bit and look for the story within the story. I may be reading too much into this, but I really think, Dan, this is just another one of those signals. It's kind of housekeeping on the part of the Ontario Hockey League. And for my money, we are at the very beginning of the intense recruiting processes that are going to be happening in the years ahead. I say give it 5 years ish, and the landscape will have changed dramatically in terms of what Ontario Hockey League teams are offering to players if they come to their program. And of course, I don't mean by that cash or cars or anything like that. And the scholarships are what they are, but think about how teams will go about upgrading facilities, for example, the kinds of coaching and development they're going to be offering, etc. If you know anything about recruitment in the NCAA, you know how appealing that the NCAA makes things. And it's not just for hockey. Of course, we're talking football, you name it, because it's very big business. I think we're on the cusp of that now in the CHL, given this new landscape with the NCAA rule change. And I think this is just another, step on that path towards the fierce recruitment of players that's going to be happening in the years to come.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Mike. And for the longest time, it hasn't been apples to apples. Recruiting against a league that has a very different structure, very different schedule, very different composition in a lot of regards. It's hard. You're recruiting against a completely different animal. And when you look at the NCAA, they're tiered. You have tier one, tier two, tier three. You have different mechanisms in there to allow top level recruitment amongst the rich schools, the schools that pour a lot of resources in. So my concern, just long term, as they ferret this out, would be to avoid doing that with the CHL. You don't want to see, a 12-team tier one in the CHL, a 12-team tier two, et cetera, et cetera. You want all these teams to be viable, but they're competing against an animal that's not like that has that advantage. So as this settles out, Mike, that's my one thing I'll be keeping an eye on, is that we want to make it viable for everyone and not just the top tier or the top resource teams. CHL has fought that battle for years, and we know there's a little bit of imbalance within the leagues. You'll hear everyone complain, oh, well, the Londons and Kitcheners have unfair advantages over, North Bays and etc. That's always going to exist, but they've done a pretty darn good job of making sure that it's as level as it could be from a competitive standpoint. So I'm just hoping external influences don't change that.
You know what else is hard is predicting the hockey future and the development trajectory of a 15-year-old. But that's what we do on an annual basis in this league, and our OHL Priority selection has wrapped up once again. Congratulations to Caden McGregor from the Ottawa Valley Titans to the Peterborough Petes as the first overall pick in this year's OHL draft. I know, Dan, you and I are invested spending our time watching the players that are already in the OHL, so we don't get near the time we used to watch the players that are coming into the league. But any takeaways from the draft this year?
Yeah, there were a few actually, Mike. I think one of the takeaways, we always know that the Toronto area teams and GTHL teams really dominate the draft, as they did. Toronto Titans led the way with, I believe, 15 drafted players, then Don Mills and JRC from there. I thought it was interesting that it was the fourth pick of the draft before a Toronto area kid was taken, which is interesting. You got an Ottawa Valley kid first overall, Sun County second, so you had some diversity there. I think another big takeaway for me, Mike, in this, you don't see this very often in the NHL draft. 14th overall. 14th overall was the first time we saw a defenseman pick. So forward heavy, top heavy draft. And I think that's not surprising at this age, Mike, because you see a lot of kids develop offensive games earlier and you can get those really potent kids earlier. And the thinking is that defensemen, the playing field's kind of level. You might get those in the second, third, fourth rounds and still get a pretty good player. There's not as much difference between the first round defenders and the second round defenders, so maybe you can get away with it. But I thought it was interesting that only 3D went in the entire 23 picks of the first round, and also a little bit maybe of a smaller draft. I know Nikolai Kuleman's son Alex was drafted ninth overall by Kingston, a bit of a bigger kid. But generally, when you look up and down the sizing of these players, which changes a lot when you're 15, but a lot of not small kids, but certainly not a large first round. Were kind of my takeaways, I would say.
I was looking at some of the things kind of behind the scenes in this draft. One is the coverage of it, and I just want to give the league credit for that. Again, I think they put together a really slick package, and our buddy Terry Doyle did his usually stand-up job managing the draft and handling it from a broadcast perspective. And I thought it's an opportunity to just remind the league of what it's capable of here. And I recognize we're not talking about an NHL network sized production team, but this is an example of the league showcasing itself very well. I would love to see just a little bit more of that effort put into the weekly game broadcasts through the CHL app, because I know I hear it all the time from fans that subscribe. They don't exactly love the coverage that they're getting, including the camera work, etc. I just think it's an opportunity here for the league to pause and think about what it could do with this, how well it did the job this time around, and maybe because so many more eyes are on the game, they can make some investments in that regard. The other takeaway for me is I've heard a few people talking about it again, and it's, could we please go back to the in-person draft for the Ontario Hockey League? And I get the interest in that. Obviously, again, it becomes a slightly bigger deal to the players being picked. And I'm not going to get into the whole, who shows up if they don't get picked and how devastating that could be to them emotionally. I'm not interested all that interested in that argument right now. I just think that there are far higher priorities for me that I would love to see the league get invested in if it's going to make some changes like that. I know we can walk and chew gum at the same time, but before we're talking about an in-person draft and scheduling the logistics of that, how about we rebalance the schedule and worry about expansion and some things like that before we get into, that's not a high priority for me, but I heard some people talking about it. I'm like, I can wait for that if we can take care of some of these other things that I think demand attention before we go back to an in-person draft.
Yeah, I that wouldn't be super high on my priority list. I mean, it's fun to have the in person. I know the NHL is talking about doing it again because they had temporary paused that for this year. But I'm really glad you mentioned the coverage of the draft, Mike, because to me that was a great thing, and that was a starting point where it was easy to find across various platforms. It was in depth with lots of analysis. You mentioned Terry Doyle and Daryl Woodley on the panel. Mark McKelvey had in studio offerings with a couple of the high picks. We saw Brock Chitteroni that went to the 67s, third overall, right in studio with an interview on the spot. Some of those features were just tremendous. And I think for people that are trying to follow this league and get a sense of who's coming into the league and where they come from, I thought the draft coverage this year was a tremendous leap forward. So I'm with you. Let's improve some of those things. Those are what really bolster this league. And yeah, the in-person draft would be somewhere down the ladder for me.
Great job done by all of those folks on the broadcast, and something that we mentioned sort of in passing. And I wish now that we had emphasized it more when we brought it up on this podcast, is that the draft for the OHL will be moving to June, keeping it in line with the NHL draft, and also getting it out of the second round of the playoffs, because this is a really awkward time for the draft to be happening. So I wish we had kind of emphasized that more. Now that more people are talking about it, it's gaining some traction. But yeah, Dan and I mentioned that some time ago, and this just makes sense, Dan. Move it out of the playoffs and give it a place outside of the OHL season.
Yeah, for a couple of reasons. One, I think we'll see the CBA change where they'll actually, NHL teams will now have a little bit of a longer runway to sign CHL players. So you'll see more of them hopefully drafted. But also, yeah, just like you said, for these GMs and teams trying to put together their draft plan, give them a little more time and less distractions to figure it out. And by the time you do it in June too, they actually have more information on some of these players, where they're looking to play next year, what their NHL teams might be looking to do with them. So I think for all involved, it just makes more sense.
Speaking of that runway that NHL teams may have with the new CBA to sign CHL players, you and I both raised an eyebrow this past weekend with reports from Frank Saravalli about the NHL inserting itself, let's say, into junior hockey operations or lower tier hockey operations, but particularly in the United States. What do you make of this, Dan?
Well, again, Mike, the ominous part for me was how light it was on details. And we know that the NHL has been trying to hammer out the new CBA, and in doing so, they're starting on a bunch of different fronts behind closed doors, one of which was trying to, I forget the wording, but I think something along the lines of trying to find cohesion between the junior leagues and a fair playing field for the USHL, CHL, etc. That's ominous to me because we don't know what they mean by it. And we do know that there are some really powerful and influential execs on the NHL side in the States who are looking to prop up the USHL, which is great. That's fine. Let's have a good, viable league, as long as, like we said earlier, it's not at the expense of the CHL or others. So I know it looked like they wanted to have a negotiation of sorts between the OHL and the USHL with the new ruling at the NCAA level. They wanted to kind of work this out. So I don't know what this means, Mike, but it sounds like they move forward figuring out the USHL side of it with USA Hockey first to figure out how can we make all these franchises viable. So they might have put them first in line to figure something out, and now we're just waiting on the details. And hopefully the next subsequent step is something with the CHL to figure out what are we going to do to help you as well. As long as one isn't put before the other, we're okay. But like you said, Mike, with the details being as scant as they are, it's a little concerning.
Definitely something we're keeping our ears on, because Dan and I obviously are OHL/CHL guys first. And yes, this sounds ominous during a season in which we've been talking about maybe the CHL kind of absorbing the USHL and having a US division. So now if the NHL and what Frank Saravalli is reporting ominously is leading us down a path towards the USHL getting that National Hockey League support. It's almost, and look, I hate to get too nationalistic or patriotic on you here, but it's still Canada's game, isn't it? We're very proud of that on this side of the border, and all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, we're gonna help to bolster the fortunes of the USHL, but that CHL, well, it can just kind of fend for itself, and that's, I don't think, a place that we want to be going here.
Definitely not. And I think the cynicism on our part and the part of some other hockey fans north of the border is probably well founded, Mike, in that the NHL hasn't always been terribly Canada friendly. I think a lot of people could probably point to a lot of scenarios whereby, under Bettman's watch, it's been pretty America first. And we know that the CHL has lots of American teams, and there's lots, the Saginaw Spirit and Flint Firebirds and Erie Otters are all part of the OHL, and various other teams in the other leagues as well. So it's not like this is Canada versus USA on this front, but a lot of times the NHL has kind of seen it that way, as this, CHL is a Canada thing, and USA Hockey is behind the USHL, and USA Hockey is very influential in NHL boardrooms, believe it or not. So I'm not always sure that things are doled out fairly when it comes to the NHL. So we'll just kind of have to wait and see here.
One of the other items from our news and notes before we move on to some second round analysis comes from my favorite place, not in the Ontario Hockey League, but I cannot resist bringing this up. And I'll go back to what we were talking about around the draft. You can talk all you want about making it an in person draft again and getting the league to move in that direction. Not as high a priority for me as a rebalanced schedule and getting our alignment or our expansion stuff figured out. And am I reading too much into it, Dan, when I read that in Cornwall, they're making some major upgrades to the civic community complex? I mean, they're not talking private suites or anything like that, but gosh darn it, if I'm hearing upgrades to an arena in Cornwall, my antennae are in the air. I want Cornwall back in this league. Am I reading too much into this?
Well, I don't know. Again, it's one step that would have to be taken. I think we've seen it in a few centers. We've seen Burlington, Oakville, places like that looking to get facilities that could host an OHL franchise. It doesn't mean anything's gone beyond that, but once that's the first step. Once you have the facility, then a lot more chips can fall into place. So I don't know that you're reading too much into it, Mike, but when you look over your right shoulder and see that beautiful jersey, someone's got to find a place to house that again, right?
That is a nice looking Cornwall Royals jersey. My buddy Jason Hagholm had it personalized for me. One of these days, I'm going to turn it around so it just says Farwell on the back of it. But the mayor of Cornwall, in an interview in December of 2024, so not even 6 months ago, was talking about his interest in bringing the Ontario Hockey League back to the city of Cornwall. Again, as you point out, there are many more steps that would have to be taken, and these franchises do not come inexpensively these days. And we know that the economic fortunes of Cornwall are far different today than they were back in the 1990s. But I loved the franchise in the league. It was successful in the league. I think it's a right-sized market, but you're going to need the financial wherewithal to make this happen. I just can't help but think of the eastern part of the Ontario Hockey League with Cornwall and Belleville a part of it again. I just get excited by that idea. I think it lines up really nicely geographically, quite frankly.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's a natural fit in the eastern corner of the province to have them there. Like you said, the history, and I just like when you have some sort of visionaries involved and not be too short sighted because yeah, it's a lot of investment up front that might not look sustainable, but the what these franchises do for these communities is profound. I mean, the just from the tourism economy standpoint, putting your community on the map, all kinds of benefits from this long term. So, uh, making that upfront investment is often quite worthwhile, and hopefully, the folks in Cornwall can sort it out.
All right. Round two is 2 games in, and we are surprised, Dan and I, plus OHL grads are making their mark and some recent signings to talk about as well as we continue this week's episode of the OHL podcast. The NBA 82 game grind is done. And now the real fun begins. The NBA playoffs are here, and it's time for all the high stakes drama, clutch moments, and jaw dropping plays. I can't wait. If you're looking to make the playoffs even more exciting, DraftKings Sportsbook has you covered as an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Try placing a bet on your favorite player's performance. Will they drop 30 points, 40 or more? It's your call. And here's something special for first timers. New DraftKings customers bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Make it a playoff run to remember with DraftKings. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code THPN. That's code THPN for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Well, Dan, we are 2 games into round two in the OHL playoffs, and I think both you and I, it would be fair to say, are raising a Spocky an eyebrow at least at a couple of these series. One in the East, one in the West. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Barrie, Kingston, and Windsor, Kitchener have us at least mildly interested 2 games in.
Yeah, that's fair to say. Where would you like to start? Which of the two?
Let's go with the East for
East.
starters.
Okay. Yeah, I think I hinted at it off the top. I was all in on Kingston second half of the season and first series that they played. I just thought they looked so controlled, so prepared, so dominant. I was not expecting that they'd give up a bushel in the next series, and in the first two games they have, Barry has found not much resistance getting to the net against Kingston. Barry's got that kind of vaunted defense that they can keep the puck on that. They've been giving up a few too. It's been a much higher scoring series than I would have anticipated. But I don't believe we've seen the best of Kingston yet. Or is it just that this is the Barry Colts team everyone expected when they made the trades at the trade deadline and loaded up the top six? And now you got Wakely and Romani going, and maybe they're just too much. And we're going to see that top end Barry Colts team, but definitely not what I was expecting in the first two games.
You touched on exactly what I've been wondering about. Is this the Barry Colts team that people thought, at least on paper, when they added at the deadline, having already been a preseason at least contender that we were talking about? I said coming into the playoffs, I didn't like the way the Colts were going. I said as this round started and why I picked Kingston in 5 that I just can't figure the Colts out. And they're making me look very foolish in that regard. But I can't help but wonder, Dan, if you, my friend, are the Kingston curse, because one of your recent performers of the week, which we'll get to later in this episode, was Charlie Schenkel. And nobody is pulling any punches when it comes to the fact that Kingston needs some saves. I don't think they're going to go to Mason Vicari for game 3, but I don't think the leash is all that long for Charlie Schenkel, unfortunately, at this point for the Frontenacs.
Yeah, and it can't be. And I'm sorry, Kingston and Charlie, if I'm the curse. Having said that, playoffs are short. You don't have the luxury of waiting too long for someone to figure it out. And yeah, you want to extend some latitude to your veteran players. And Charlie Schenkel's an overage player that played fantastic hockey in round one. You almost have to roll with him at this point. But it's this is what makes things really tough to be a coach in this league, because what do you do? What happens if you put a relatively cold Vicari in net and he doesn't fare well either, and you're gone? So it's damned if you do, damned if you don't at this point. But yeah, how long can you go with someone that's not feeling it? So we'll see what Kingston does. My suspicion is we're going to see a very different Frontenacs team on home ice. We typically have. Um, we know it's in them. We know it's there. Rough start. So game 3 is going to be extremely telltale.
I think across every series, they're all 2-0 in favor of the teams that started on home ice. It's been said that a series is not over until a team loses on home ice. And before we get to that Western Conference series that's surprising us a little bit, let's just finish off in the East. We both had Brantford, if I remember your picks. Is that right, Dan?
I had Oshawa.
You had Oshawa, sorry,
Yeah.
in 7?
In 6.
In 6,
Oh,
okay.
sorry,
And
7. So no,
so you
7.
had
You're right. 7.
Oshawa
Yeah.
on 7. I
Yeah.
should pay more attention and
Yeah.
make notes when you talk.
Yeah.
My apologies. And I had Brantford in 7,
Yeah.
figuring home ice would be required here. The Bulldogs also, though, finding a way to fill the net against Jacob Oster and these Oshawa Generals, scoring 12 in their first 2 home games.
Yeah, and I think the reason you and I both had this series in 7 was for obvious reasons. Both powerhouse teams. It's not going to be shocking if either one of them wins. I think what tipped the scales for me is I just felt Oshawa was a little bit deeper throughout all the positions. I've like from forward through to goaltending. Felt that Brantford rolls pretty hot on that top line, but if you could shut them down, it might get a little bit thin. That was kind of my thinking, but we all know that Brantford's a steamroller when they're going too. So I wouldn't say I'm shocked to see them win the first couple games, but I think we're going to see an answer from Oshawa. I think that team's just too good to go quietly. So your point about until you lose on home ice, which is always a saying that I'm never quite sure about, because you don't have to necessarily win on the road if if you have home ice advantage, right?
Absolutely. You're right about that. And I agree. Oshawa will have an answer when they get back to Tribute Community Center. They get Beckett Seneca back for game number 2. He was missing in the first game. And you're right, just up and down that Oshawa lineup, so well built. But when Brantford gets going, the steamroller starts gathering momentum. And oh, yeah, by the way, ho hum, just another hat trick for Nick Lardis in the game 2 win for the Bulldogs. So that team is firing on all of those cylinders right now in the East. Over in the West, I think the series that's surprising us a little bit, and not necessarily, even though I took Kitchener in 6 and you took Windsor in 7, this series looks to everybody like it's going to go the distance. So 2-0. Kitchener hasn't lost on home ice yet. Meh. It's the way that Windsor dominated the first 2 games, to my eyes anyway, Dan, that's got me a little surprised in this one.
That's exactly it, Mike. It's the way the games have gone. And I know Kitchener fans, myself included, will say it. So my concern with Kitchener was that the depth of offense was a little questionable beyond the top 6. And they've been playing the first 2 games. We saw Christian Humphreys go down early. They played without Luke Elnis, and we know their top scorer, Adrian Miseljevic's been missing. So you say, well, you take 3 players out of your top 6 when you're already a bit thin below that. Not shocking. On the Windsor side, we know Ethan Belchet's is out. We know Mathurin's out. We know what they're missing some fairly important players as well. So I was expecting a tight series. I've been stunned at how easily Kitchener has kind of been rolled over, and they've had some discipline issues, taking a lot of penalties. I think power play is 13-7 in favor of Windsor. Windsor's playing a controlled game. They're not intimidated whatsoever. And Kitchener just kind of looks flustered and disorganized to me, which is the exact 2 opposite adjectives I would have used for their season. They were seldom flustered in the season. They were always organized. So seeing a team have a completely different look and identity in the playoffs is kind of, I think, what's got me surprised, Mike. Probably you as well.
Carson Woodall also
Yep.
out for Windsor. AJ Spellacy didn't play game number 2, so nobody's going to be holding a pity party for the Kitchener Rangers. But you nail it, Dan. And look, it was a completely flustered team in game 1, the Rangers, that is, already without Misiljevic, who was a point per game leading scorer during the regular season. Ellen is gone from that Slewfoot 2-game suspension. There's 2 of your top 6, and then Humphreys goes down in the first period. And to quote my late, great broadcasting friend, Don Cameron, it was like 2 strangers and a cousin playing out there together. Nobody could find any sort of rhythm with one another. But I would have thought it would be a different story in game number 2 for Kitchener, and it just wasn't. And I think there are 2 reasons for that. Number one is, and when fans look at a game, they always look at it through the lens of their own team. And so if you're a Ranger fan, you're like, what's going on with the Kitchener Rangers? Well, I'll tell you part of what's going on with the Kitchener Rangers. Their names are, and I'll quote my current broadcast partner, the Big 3 in Windsor. The Big 3 used to be Ford, GM, and Chrysler. The Big 3 in Windsor right now are Protas, Greentree, and Morneau. Those 3 together, and somebody please check Ilya Protas's birth certificate, okay? Because this guy, he's unreal. Like, getting a chance to watch him closely over these last 6 periods has been an absolute treat, just as a hockey fan. The littlest little things to keep a play alive, whatever it happens to be. Nonetheless, those 3 have been dominant. And the other thing, and Dan, I cringe even saying this because he was named the overage player of the year. He has been everything for the Kitchener Rangers this season. And I'm not by any stretch of the imagination saying it's on him, but Jackson Parsons has just been average. And that's not what we have seen from him through 68 regular season games.
Well, it has to be said, though, right, Mike? Because when you look at the Kitchener Rangers season, as good as that team was all year, a good chunk of that was Jackson Parsons. He was winning games for them. They had a lot of 1-goal games, a lot of close games, and the difference was the goaltending. He took away 2 or 3 sure goals. The guy at the other end didn't. Kitchener wins. So if you stop getting that, is this the result? I don't know. So it's a 2-game sample size. It's impossible to say, oh, this is on Jackson Parsons, or this Kitchener was never that good. Those things are unfair as well. This team is good. They're capable of being much better. But you're right. And I think we saw it, especially in game 1. I think one of the ones that stood out to me, Mike, you probably remember Cristoforo jumping into the play. Looked like he was behind Max Diracolo rushing for the puck. Diracolo just didn't quite have the wherewithal and the jump to kind of fend him off. And Cristoforo got a little bit of a one-handed stick on, should have been an easy save, kind of slid through. Type of thing we don't usually see get through Jackson Parsons. And you started to wonder, something in their heads here. They're a little bit on the back foot. They're not quite the calm, organized team we've seen. And now it's going to be, how do they react? Because you've been challenged by a team that you just mentioned, it, Mike, might have the 2 best players in the league right now, and Protas and Greentree. They're going to be playing with oodles of confidence. We've seen a bunch of their young players step into the lineup due to absences. We saw Andrew Robinson get his first OHL goal, looking like a veteran out there. So as a team start to build confidence, and you see the other team's confidence erode, how do you turn that around in 2 days? And well, we'll find out.
We will. And I have zero doubt that the Kitchener Rangers will be a much different team in game three. And just to emphasize this point, you can let us know immediately through your feedback to ohlpodcast at rogers.com, because Dan and I are recording this at the end of the second games for every series. So by the time this comes out on your usual Tuesday morning, we have to get this done now, because I'll kind of be busy working during game three, Windsor Kitchener. But you can let us know right away, first thing Tuesday, when this episode comes out, were we right or were we wrong about a different Rangers team? I don't think we're going to be wrong about that. Kitchener was just too good and too consistent all season long for this to be the way the entire series goes. And I still think it's going to be a long series. It's going to go at least 6, likely 7. Nobody's going to be walking over anybody, I don't think, in the Windsor Kitchener series. Might be different in the London Erie series. Dare I say, Erie shot its shot in game number 1 when they got within 1 goal in the second period, and then London ran away in the third, and then they really ran away in game 2 to take the commanding 2-0 series lead, Dan.
Yeah, and not shocking here. We know how good the London team is. I think what's always concerned me all year about Erie is just, are they going to be able to prevent the goals? And, when push has come to shove so far in this series, they haven't been able to. They every time London's needed a goal, they found it. I know it's 2 games. They're both in London. Tough place to play. Hopefully, we're going to see a much different Otters team in games 3 and 4, because we know how good they can be when they're firing. They haven't had much trouble finding goals when they need them either. But yeah, you've got to find a way to prevent a little better against London if you want to get back in this series. So game 3 for them is going to be absolutely massive, because you down 3-0 against London. Good luck.
Something really strange happened with Noah Erliden in game number 2, the goaltender for the Erie Otters. Did he pull himself from the game, or what happened there? But his mask came off. He goes to the bench for an equipment adjustment and never comes back. And I loved head coach Chris Millette and his quote after the game. I'm paraphrasing here, but it was along the lines of, "That's really none of your business. It was an equipment issue. I don't have to answer that. And, it's the playoffs," kind of thing. But I don't know what happened with Erliden essentially removing himself from the game. But I expect we'll see him as this series goes on. But it was just a bizarre turn of events in a playoff game where Erliden and the Otters were under siege from that potent Knights offense.
Yeah, I know. Playoff time is always talk about a lack of information. You don't get much at playoff time, and who knows? Maybe he had the flu. Maybe something was going on. Maybe he didn't want to embarrass the kids, so he's kind of under the guise of this equipment issue. Who knows? It could be any number of things. All we know is we don't get terribly honest information from the organizations at this time of year, so leaves us guessing.
It has been a homer's second round to date, but game 3 can change all of that as we continue into this second round, and we continue on this week's episode of your OHL podcast. Our performers of the week are still to come, and it's not just current OHL'ers that are performing. We'll fill you in on that as we continue with the OHL podcast. Dan, when I was talking before about Ilya Protas and just the little things that he does to keep plays alive, let's check his birth certificate to make sure, because he's such a man amongst boys in this league. And the Kitchener Rangers aren't exactly a tiny team, but it made me think of that Quinton Byfield goal this past week, the former Sudbury Wolf with the LA Kings, one hand on the stick to knock it down and then sweep it into the net. Never have I ever seen anything like that before. How impressive was that?
Well, big frames like Quinton Byfield, scouts drool over them, and then oftentimes fans get a little frustrated because these guys aren't putting up 100 points in year 2. Well, we know big bodies take a little longer. We know what makes them successful, and as you saw in that goal, they can just bulldoze people, right, and fend an NHL level player off with one hand and score with the other. But you got to give him a little time. And you mentioned Protas, and well, look at his brother Alexei in Washington. Really, the coming out party this year. It took him a little while too, but nice to see from some OHL grads that are starting to come into their own and show why they were picked so high.
Absolutely. So the former Sudbury Wolf, Quinton Byfield with the LA Kings, Carter George, the Owen Sound attack goaltender, also in the LA Kings system. And what does he do after leaving the OHL and joining the Ontario Reign, LA's AHL club? He just picks up a shutout in his pro debut. Not bad. Former Barrie Colt Jet Greaves, who happens to be a native of Cambridge, Ontario, near where Dan and I live, picked up his first NHL shutout with Columbus. Tristan Lennox, another kid from Cambridge, made his NHL debut with the New York Islanders. Lennox is a former Saginaw Spirit. What else have I got down here? How about Gabriel Landeskog? More than 1,000 days between professional hockey goals, and Landeskog gets one on his conditioning stint in hopes of getting back to the National Hockey League. Landeskog, a former Kitchener Ranger, and now, of course, a Stanley Cup champion and trying to get back on the ice with the Colorado Avalanche.
Yeah, that's of everything you just mentioned. That's the best story for me because we all know what a great character guy Landeskog is and what a grind he has been through for a couple years now with his health. Seeing him be able to get on the ice at that level again, even if it's short lived, is just incredible for him and his family. And you mentioned Tristan Lennox, Mike. Just a quick shout there for head coach Patrick Waugh. Interesting game. He got his debut where after the fact, Patrick Waugh actually apologized for how he was utilized in that game because it was a 9-2 loss to the New York Rangers, and he did not handle the goaltenders well in that game. And after the game, it was nice to see him come out and acknowledge that and say, basically apologize to young Tristan and say, "I'm sorry, fella. That shouldn't have been how it went." But the life of a goalie, Mike.
Couple of OHL'ers taking another step towards future professional careers, signing their entry-level contracts. Blake Smith, who was with Flint this year, also a former Oshawa General, signs with the Toronto Maple Leafs. And Nathan Villeneuve, a former Sudbury Wolf, signs with the Seattle Kraken. A buddy of mine who worked in this league, the Ontario Hockey League, as a broadcaster and had been covering the Sudbury Wolves for a number of years, shared a story about Nathan Villeneuve that I thought was worth repeating here because when Thomas Mercier, who shared the story, posted it on social media, it got quite a bit of traction. And I think, like I said, it deserves to be talked about again. There was a time when they were traveling, and oftentimes broadcasters and media will travel on the team bus, and they were getting off for a meal. And Thomas had declined the meal option on that particular trip. He was just going to hang out on the bus and wait for the team to finish. And as Villeneuve walked by, he asked about this, and Tom said, "No, I'm not getting a meal." He said, "Well," and Villeneuve is like, "Just come on in and sit at my table because nobody should be alone when the team's having a meal." And I think, you know what? That's a pretty good thing to do. That's good awareness for a 17, 18-year-old kid who's playing for the Sudbury Wolves at the time.
That's actually a small but unbelievable story for the character demonstrated because it's not always easy for a teenage player to even interact with adults and professionals like that. So good on him for recognizing that. That's amazing. I've said for a while Nathan Villeneuve clearly has pro traits. That's why NHL scouts were interested in him from day one. So I expect he's a kid that's going to play for a long time there. Just Nathan, a little word of advice though. I love your character. I love your grit. Looking for your first pro fight, maybe pick someone other than Scott Sabrin, please.
Why? Why, Dan? Why would you suggest that by
Uh,
chance?
that's like me. That's like me. Going and challenging like Conor McGregor or something to prove a point. I know. I love it. I love the character. I love the gumption. But you want to play a long time, Nathan. You don't need to be fighting those guys.
I wasn't entirely sure after watching that if Nathan Villeneuve even really knew where he got to the penalty box. Did he know where he was at the time, Dan? I'm not certain that he did.
Quite possibly not. It's one of those things. Sometimes in the heat of the battle, you're in a fight, and then it's like, oh my goodness, what did I just do? And but you know what? He good on him. He's a guy that he'll compete regardless, and I'm sure people took note for a lot of the right reasons as well.
No question about that. Dan and I are not scouts, but we like to play scouts on this podcast, at least to some degree. So all season long, we bring you a prospect of the week for the NHL draft during every episode. During the playoffs, we change that to a performer of the week. And we'll start with you, Dansky. Who you got this week?
Well, Mike, I might be breaking precedent here for the second week in a row. I'm gonna go with a goalie, and we talked a little bit about the surprise of the Kitchener Windsor series. I want to give the props to Joey Costanzo because coming into this series, all the talk was, oh, this monster at the other end in Jackson Parsons. Is Costanzo even going to be able to play in the same barn as him? Well, through a couple games, not only is he playing the same barn, he's clearly winning that war. And there's a kid that's won 6 games so far in the playoffs, only the one overtime loss to Sioux. And the numbers of sub 2 GAA, north of 920 save percentage. Watching these games, they're getting every save they need from Joey Costanzo and then some. He looks calm and assured in the net, playing great hockey. So shout out to Joey for this week.
It's funny, a lot of talk about Costanzo, his second half not quite as strong as his first. And what was it going to be like? I had him on my radar too. I guess it shows what series we've been watching the most closely in this second round. And I've got another goaltender to give a nod to in a moment. But as for my performer of the week, I'm in the same series and with the same team. And I'm looking at Ryan Abraham, who's got 8 points in 7 playoff games, but 7 of those 8 points in his last 3 games. 4 goals, 3 assists in 3 games for Ryan Abraham. And he is who I identify as my performer of the week.
That's a great call because Abraham quietly behind Green Tree and Protus, and we already mentioned Morneau. That's the kind of consistent secondary scoring Windsor's getting that's making a difference right now. And Kitcher's going to have to find a way to get it, or it's going to be over quickly because Abraham's been brilliant.
You nailed it, Dan, because as good as those big 3 have been, when you've got guys like Ryan Abraham chipping in as well, you mentioned Andrew Robinson before, his first career OHL goal, that makes the Windsor Spitfires all that much more formidable for the Kitchener Rangers, who again will bounce back, we fully expect, and make a series of this. The goaltender I wanted to touch on too, and almost exclusively because Brian Smiley in the Brantford Expositor put it this way, when David Igorov came in to relieve an injured Ryerson Leanders in game 1 of Brantford's playoff series with the Oshawa Generals. The Gens up 2-0 in the game at the time. And what does Igorov do? He comes in, stops 22 shots. Brantford goes on to win 5-2. Brian Smiley wrote in the Brantford Expositor that when David Igorov came into the game, the only thing he forgot was his cape, as if he was some sort of superhero. I liked it. Obviously, Oshawa got to him in game number 2 for 5, but hey, it was enough. He made enough saves for Brantford to take that 2-0 lead. So I wanted to give a nod to Igorov as well.
I'm glad you did, Mike, because Igorov has actually been under the radar, superb for Brantford for most of the year when they needed him to be. I mean, everybody said, oh, finally they got Leanders. They got a top-end goaltending. Now they can go somewhere. But every time I watched them, Igorov was playing extremely well for them. So, you know, when called upon, injuries happen, things happen. So kudos to David for stepping up when needed.
Once again, we remind you that we love your feedback on this podcast. You can reach us anytime via email, ohlpodcast@rogers.com. Find Dan on X at his name, Dan Mahar. I'm on X at Farwell_OHL. To our buddy Gar, who sent an email, says, I know you guys love the YouTube channel, but I like to listen while I walk the dog. Fantastic. However it is that you consume this podcast, give it a like, subscribe so you get the automatic downloads, tell a friend, leave a comment on YouTube, leave a comment on your podcast channel. We don't care. We're just glad you're here, and we're going to continue right through these playoffs. It can only get better from here. Am I right, Dan Mahar?
I hope so for some teams, for sure.
somebody called this the best second round in a decade about a week ago, and we're cruising for 4 sweeps here, Dan.
Yeah, Kitchener, you're making me look bad. Kingston, get on your horse. Like K teams, let's go. You're making me look bad.
That man over there is Dan Mahar. My name is Mike Farwell. We're back in 1 week from now with another episode of the OHL Podcast.